All right, so this video is on conception, pregnancy, and birth. All right, so we look at three key areas: the conception itself and the fertilization process, second part, the pregnancy and the prenatal development process, and then lastly, look at childhood and the actual labor itself. Okay, so with conception, this is when fertilization occurs, and that is when a sperm and an egg cell combine, right? And so they form what's called a zygote. And so what we can think about is if a zygote contains the complete genetic blueprint necessary for new life, half of those instructions come from the egg, half of it come from the sperm, right? So with that zygote, one of the things that we're going to see is that in the process of trying to create that, it can be difficult, right? So there are many sperm that begin that journey, but very few actually reach the egg, and even then only one can actually fertilize the egg in a normal pregnancy, right? So let's say, for example, if you look at the sperm release during a regular ejaculation, there can be up to hundreds of millions of sperm at any given time, hundreds of millions, and yet again only one can fertilize the egg. Right? So it can be very difficult. Factors that are going to impact the likelihood of fertility, we can look at things like age, right? So generally speaking, the younger someone is, more likely that fertility can take place. Not always a guarantee, though. You want to look at the reproductive health conditions of the individuals involved, right? So, for example, sometimes there's a low sperm count, and that might impact things. Lifestyle factors, environmental influences, and even things like the timing of intercourse itself, as far as it relates to ovulation, where that's at in its cycle. All these things can influence whether or not fertilization takes place. Right? And so what we're going to find is that there are many individuals who struggle with this, and there are a lot of reproductive technologies that actually exist today with different fertilization treatments. In particular, one of the things that we're going to see is in vitro fertilization, so IVF. And that's been helpful for many, many individuals who want to have children. Okay, so let's say we have a fertilized egg, we have our zygote. Now we can actually start the pregnancy and prenatal development. Right, so pregnancy is broken up into 3 trimesters. Right, so one way we can kind of think about that is each trimester has its particular focus. The first trimester, this is like we're laying the foundation. Right, so we're putting everything in place that needs to be there. During the second trimester, we're going to expand out that structure, and then the last trimester, we're just preparing everything for the actual completion. Right, so first trimester, we have that fertilized egg becomes implanted, and we're seeing the organs start to develop. All those major organs begin their development. It's also during the stage that we have the highest risk for miscarriage. Right? So oftentimes these are due to chromosomal abnormalities. Right? So it's not something necessarily you can control. It just happens. And so we want to consider what's the impact of that on the family, particularly the one carrying the child. Right, so there can be a grieving process associated with that, and so the more support that we can have, the better for those individuals. So we're going to come together, and if they have a good social network, that can kind of help through that recovery process. Okay, so that's the first trimester. During the second trimester, again, we're expanding the structure. If we're looking at it like a building analogy, and so this is where we see rapid fetal growth. Right, so this is where the fetus itself tends to grow in size. Right, and so this is where movement becomes more noticeable. So like the kicking that's involved, and so just a period of high growth. Okay, that third and final trimester, this is just continued growth, maybe not as much as what we were seeing during the second trimester, but it's kind of finishing everything up and actually getting things ready for the birth process. Okay, now many are going to experience physical discomfort during this third trimester because of the size of the baby, and just it causes more discomfort. During the entire pregnancy, we're going to see a number of physical changes. So obviously hormones are fluctuating quite a bit. We're naturally going to see weight gain, not just with the baby, but additional weight that comes with that as well. Fatigue is very, very common. Nausea is experienced by many. And then we may also see changes in sexual desire, right? So for most pregnancies, sexual activity remains safe, right? But comfort levels and desire might fluctuate, right? So for example, during that first trimester, if there is a lot of nausea, maybe there's not a lot of desire there, maybe associated with that. But then a lot of people do experience a high level of desire during the later stages, right? So that's something that could happen. Okay. All right, so we've gotten to the end of the third trimester, though. We're preparing ourselves for the actual labor process. So what we're going to see is that as we near that end, there are special hormonal changes that actually start to trigger the contractions that will lead to childbirth. Okay, so just like we had 3 trimesters during pregnancy, when we look at childbirth, we have 3 stages of labor. Okay, the first stage is the longest stage, and this is where everything's just kind of, again, laying the groundwork, getting everything prepared. Right, so a lot of this has to do with the cervical dilation, right, as the cervix continues to open more and more to kind of prepare for the baby to come out. And that's really what it is. And this will vary from person to person, but could take hours and hours and hours. Okay. Second phase tends to be pretty quick in comparison. This is the actual delivery part of it. So this is where the act of pushing starts to happen, and then the actual birth of the baby. Okay. Third and final phase is more like the afterbirth. So this is the placenta being taken out and things like that, and just recovery. Right. So prepping everything, the actual peak in physical activity with the pushing and everything like that, and then the recovery phase. Okay. Now, with the birth itself, there are different options, right? There's the vaginal birth, and then there's also cesarean sections or C-sections. And so each family has to make that decision on themselves. What is the birth plan? What do they prefer? What are the benefits and risks associated with each one? Okay. Once that has occurred, though, we are going to have the postpartum adjustment, trying to adjust everything that happens now that you have a new baby. Right, so there are some physical changes there as far as, again, hormonal fluctuations, the healing and recovering process, and then if you're going to breastfeed, we're going to look at stuff like lactation. Okay, psychologically, you have to look at possible identity changes, particularly if this is your first time being a parent. Depending on the family dynamics, there might be some relationship adjustments that have to occur. Taking care of a new baby often leads to a lot of stress, and then sleep deprivation is possible. And so with that as well, we're going to see there might be some emotional changes. Right? So this is a significant major life transition for many. All right, so just some questions for us to consider. Try to have us critical think about some of these things and how they apply. Number 1, how might access to healthcare, right, because that can vary from person to person according to circumstances, how might that access affect the pregnancy outcomes? Okay, so that's number 1. How can access to healthcare affect pregnancy outcomes? Number 2, when we look at making decisions about childbirth methods, when we look at establishing birth plans and things like that, what are the factors that would influence those decisions? Okay, so what are the factors that influence decisions around childbirth methods? Okay, and then kind of going back to the overall healthcare system, how can they be more inclusive for diverse families, right? So we look at different people from different backgrounds and for different family dynamics. There's a lot of variation there. And so how can we make sure the healthcare system is set up to properly serve all those individuals in a very inclusive way?